Recently, there has been a significant shift in the Middle East as 57 Arab countries unprecedentedly unite to issue a joint condemnation and warning to the United States and Israel. In response, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared a resolute readiness to confront the world. While reflecting Israel's consistent toughness, this statement also signifies their recognition of transitioning from international opinion leaders to becoming perceived as global enemies. Why is the unified shout from 57 Arab nations considered historic? It's unimaginable for Iran, Turkey, Syria, and Sunni nations like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Yemen to voice a unified stance in the same forum. On November 11, Saudi Arabia hosted the Arab Islamic Unity Summit in Riyadh. This essentially combined the participants of the Arab League Summit and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Summit, demonstrating the unity of the Arab world. In this video, we will focus on the summit, discussing 1. The historic visit and participation of Iranian President Rouhani. 2. Declarations from various countries and the joint statement. 3. Can the Arab countries' unified shout stop Israel's aggression? The first highlight of the summit was the historic visit and participation of Iranian President Rouhani. Considering the long-standing enmity between Shia-led Iran and Sunni-led Saudi Arabia, marked by proxy wars, the warm atmosphere during President Rouhani's visit to Saudi Arabia for the Arab Islamic Unity Summit is exceptionally friendly, a development facilitated by China's historic role in brokering Iran-Saudi reconciliation in March. In recent months, both Iran and Saudi Arabia announced the restoration of diplomatic ties, reopening embassies. The Arab League, after an 8-year hiatus, readmitted Syria, signaling the next step in the reconciliation process, leaders' mutual visits and talks. In the group photo of the Arab Islamic Unity Summit, Saudi Crown Prince Salman, representing the host, stood at the center, surrounded by carefully arranged leaders. On the left of the Crown Prince were the leaders of Palestine, Abbas, Turkey, Erdogan, and Iran, Rouhani. On his right were the leaders of Jordan, King Abdullah II, Egypt, Sisi, and Syria, Assad. Among these nations, Palestine, historically marginalized, now occupies a central position, a testament to the summit's core agenda of supporting Palestine. Turkey and Iran on the right are formidable geopolitical and military powers in the region. On the left, the three countries share borders with Israel, forming a united front of neighboring nations. Regardless of being Shia or Sunni nations, democracies or hereditary monarchies, the summit delivered a unified and unanimous voice against Israel, the United States, and the international community. This diplomatic gathering further solidified Saudi Arabia's leadership in the Middle East, enhancing the prestige of Crown Prince Salman. The second focal point of this summit is the stances of various countries and the joint statement. Although this summit represents a unified condemnation from 57 countries against Israel and the United States, the intensity of condemnation varies among different nations. In this regard, both Palestine and Saudi Arabia condemned Israel's aggressive acts, vehemently rejecting any attempts by Israel to divide Gaza and the West Bank. President Erdogan of Turkey, while joining other countries in condemning Israel's aggression and censuring the U.S. for tolerating and sheltering it, took it a step further by condemning the entire Western world for its double standards. He criticized the West for turning a blind eye to the slaughter and acts of genocide against the Palestinian people. Among all nations, the most vehement rhetoric and firmest stance against the U.S. and Israel came from Iranian President Rouhani. President Rouhani openly expressed support for Hamas, stating, "There is no alternative but to resist Israel. We embrace Hamas's resistance against Israel." The 57-country summit concluded with a joint statement, a unified roar against the United States, Israel, and the international community. The first point of the joint statement collectively condemns Israel's attacks on Gaza and the West Bank, emphasizing the core status of the Palestinian issue in the Arab world. The second point collectively condemns Israel for committing serious war crimes, urging the International Criminal Court to investigate and prosecute Israel's war crimes in Gaza. The third point calls on the United Nations Security Council to make decisive and binding decisions and urges countries worldwide to cease military assistance to Israel. The fourth point supports Egypt's immediate initiation of rescue and aid efforts for Palestine and Gaza. The fifth point supports the establishment of a financial network among Arab countries for Palestine, providing financial donations, as well as financial, economic, and humanitarian support. While this declaration encompasses condemnation of the U.S. and Israel, appeals to the UN Security Council, and a bitter resolution for Palestinian aid, it lacks specific measures for economic or armed struggles. The third highlight of this summit is whether the unified shout can deter Israel's aggression. The conclusion is pessimistic. While the unified will of 57 nations may shake the U.S. and Israel, prompting urgent analysis of the changes in the Middle East, the Israeli government, prepared to confront the world, was mentally prepared for the opposition from 57 Arab countries' condemnations. Although this joint declaration by 57 countries is united, their most direct weapons against the U.S. and Israel remain strong condemnation, lacking armed conflict or a collective consensus on economic struggles. Arab countries have issued a strong appeal to the international community, hoping the UN Security Council and the International Criminal Court will play a more significant role. However, the U.S. veto power in the Security Council, essentially equivalent to Israel's veto power, has been evident in the month-long council negotiations. The U.S. not only refuses to agree to decisive and binding resolutions but even language criticizing Israel's use of force struggles to gain approval. As for the International Criminal Court, while it dares to convict Russian President Putin of war crimes, it appears conveniently deaf and mute in the Israel-Palestine conflict. If the International Criminal Court investigates Gaza, the probable conclusion might be Hamas's war crimes and Israel's excessive self-defense, possibly followed by a note of Israel's excessive self-defense. Israel is geographically situated with the sea to the west, Lebanon to the north, Syria and Jordan to the east, and Egypt to the south. Therefore, Israel's four neighboring countries form a basis for launching a coalition to engage in combat against Israel. However, following the defeat in the 1970s, Egypt, once a prominent player in the Arab world's resistance against Israel, took an unexpected turn. It not only succumbed to U.S. influence but also, remarkably, established diplomatic ties with Israel. Jordan and Egypt, instead of deploying troops against Israel, have been less fervent in their opposition than some South American countries and have not officially severed ties with Israel. Syria remains in a state of continued invasion and internal conflict since the United States, and Lebanon alone cannot confront Israel. Therefore, the formation of a four-country coalition is unattainable. At present, Iran and Turkey are the most vociferous in their opposition to Israel, not hesitating to issue military threats. However, since both nations do not share a border with Israel, engaging in war with Israel would require neighboring countries to open their borders and agree to passage. This entails Saudi Arabia coordinating with several Sunni nations to permit passage, including Iraq, which has faced U.S. invasion for 2 decades and is currently experiencing governmental disintegration. To meet these conditions and create a situation wherein Arab coalition besieges Israel can occur, it is evident that the external conditions are not currently in place. Given the impossibility of a military siege, at this stage, the international community speculates that the most potent weapon for Arab countries is to wield their oil weapon, imposing economic sanctions on the U.S. and Europe. This could coerce the U.S. and Europe to abandon Israel, thus compelling Israel to cease hostilities in isolation. During this summit, Iranian President Rouhani explicitly proposed launching oil and economic sanctions against the U.S. and Europe. However, among the unified Arab countries, the call for an economic oil war faced explicit opposition from 3 nations, the UAE, Bahrain, and others. The UAE is regarded in the international community as Saudi Arabia's younger brother. The stance expressed by the UAE, which reflects positions Saudi Arabia may not publicly declare, is scrutinized by the international community to infer Saudi Arabia's will. From this, it can be inferred that Saudi Arabia currently lacks the determination to launch oil and economic countermeasures against the West. Thus, we observe that at this stage, the 57 Arab countries are merely unifying in outcry, and not unifying in deploying troops, or unifying in economic sanctions. Consequently, the resistance against Israeli military actions will be significantly limited. The historic unified outcry from the 57 Arab nations cannot halt Israel's ongoing war. Does this imply they are merely inept and without any significance? Not necessarily. In the decades following the collapse of the Soviet Union, during the era when the United States emerged as the sole superpower, U.S. Middle East policy aimed at sowing discord and conflicts among nations, preventing the formation of coalitions, and promoting mutual aggression. Thus, the past Arab world was neither unified nor capable of military cooperation. Although today's Arab world is still unable to form a coalition, it has at least achieved the initial step of collective unity. The current 57 nations in the Middle East, able to issue a unified outcry, lay a solid foundation for tomorrow's greater unity. This is the end of this video. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment. We genuinely appreciate your support.